There we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it very much. Tim Andersen here, the Appraiser's Advocate, and we've got another interview with Craig Morley. Craig, give us a quick background on yourself so we know your bona fides, and then we're going to get into some questions on AMCs, most appraisers' favorite topic. So please, Craig, go ahead.
You know, Tim, probably the one of the areas that I've had a little bit of experience with in dealing with AMCs is that when back in 2008 or just prior, and actually it was the fall of 2007, we had word of the home valuation code of conduct that was going to happen. At that time, I was serving on the Utah Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board, and I was back in Washington, D.C. at an Aero conference, and it was there that we began to see what some of this regulatory oversight was going to look like. And at that time, if you were in the business and you think back during that time, you'll recall that there was a lot of appraisal fraud or loan fraud with appraisers participating that was going on. And so, you know, this is my personal little editorial. Instead of just enforcing the rules we already had in place, we decided to create some new ones, which took the form of the Home Valuation Code of Conduct. And as I'm sitting in these meetings, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, great. We're going to create this system that is going to prevent manipulation of the appraiser by withholding fees and all of the things that were going on prior to that. But who is there going to be that is going to ensure that this stuff happens? And there was no enforcement mechanism that we could see that was going to be in place. And so I'm there with our state investigators, and the minute we get back, we start exploring the prospect of developing some kind of regulatory oversight for appraisal management companies. And really, that was my first foray into the development of state laws as it applied to appraisal management companies. At that time, it turns out my brother was serving in the state legislature. We are in the fall. We have the legislation usually started around Martin Luther King Day, and it was an annual event, and you really had to have your legislation in place and going. There's usually far more legislators wanting to promote laws than there are time and resources to get them done. The Division of Real Estate was having a budget shortfall because of the economics. And so there were all kinds of issues that we had to deal with. And we were able to get a AMC regulatory oversight through in the 2008 legislative session, which was one of the first states to have any kind of AMC regulation. And so ever since that time, we've had some involvement in dealing with appraisal management companies, some of the issues that are associated with that. And it was a real learning experience for me going through that whole process. So that, in terms of this topic, is probably one of the areas where I've had at least a little bit of practical exposure. As you have mentioned before, I am the president of the National Association of Appraisers, and I'm currently the chair of the National Association of Realtors Real Property Valuation Committee. I've been actively involved in state legislative affairs through the Utah Association of Realtors and the Utah Association of Appraisers.
Okay, let's capitalize on that. Let's talk about AMCs from the standpoint of appraisers, from boots on the ground appraisers. Now, even though you're a principal of Morley and McConkey, and even though you're president of NAA and you're deeply involved with realtors, you're still a boots on the ground appraiser. So let's talk about that. Craig, why don't appraisers care for the AMC business model?
Well, I think probably the single biggest deficiency from my perspective as we deal with the appraisal management model for appraisers dealing with that model is that there is a perception and some reality associated with that perception that the appraisal management company, I mean, I have seen countless people say, well, they're taking part of my fee. Now, in reality, it may feel that way and may seem that way, but it's really not true. But the reality is that the problem that I see is most appraisal management companies are working with their clients, the lender. They are fulfilling a regulatory process in selecting and getting appraisals done, and their clients just want a fixed fee. And so what ends up happening, instead of having an appraisal management company that says, listen, I will manage your appraisal desk at your bank and I will charge you $150 an assignment, they usually give them a flat fee, and then they become incentivized to try to select the appraiser who will do the appraisal for the lowest fee because they are able to keep the difference. And I think if there is one flaw in the system, it's this idea that the management company's primary incentive oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, is not to get the most qualified, competent appraiser to do the assignment. It's who can I get to do the assignment fast and cheap? And we all kind of know that when that's our motivation, the quality of the assignment results is maybe not as good as it ought to be.
Let's examine that for a moment. Obviously, the AMC business model has a benefit to the lender. Somebody's managing the appraisal desk, therefore the lender doesn't have to do it. But what, if any, are the benefits of an AMC for the appraiser?
Well, you know, you're going to have to dig real deep down into the toolbox, but but the reality is there have been, I think if we were to look across the board, we have had less influence on appraisers where the appraiser is, it still happens, don't get me wrong, I know there are people that have been threatened and there's all kinds of problems, but it's not as bad as it used to be. And payment for appraisal services tends to be better than it was before. Now, I read all the time about people who are dealing with an AMC where they get in arrears and they're not getting paid as readily as they should, but it's better than it used to be. And so the benefits, an AMC's primary function isn't necessarily to serve and benefit the appraiser. It's their primary focus is to serve and benefit their client, the lender. And we are one of the necessary service providers that they are engaging to help meet their clients' needs. And so if we think that the appraisal management company's primary focus is on the appraiser, then we're going to be disappointed.
Speaking of being disappointed, let's examine fees without going into fees, but let's examine fees for a moment. Is the appraiser under any obligation to accept the fee an AMC offers, or is the appraiser completely free to laugh and then get back with the AMC and say, no, I won't do it for that, but I will do it for this?
You know, most of the time, now there are some appraisers who find themselves in a jam because they've signed a contract with an appraisal management company, and in that case, if you've signed a contract, then I guess you're stuck with whatever the contract outlines. But I know for us and the arrangements we have, and we deal with a lot of AMCs, and we have good experiences with AMCs, and we have some that aren't so good. And we've had some that we just have determined we don't want to deal with. But the reality is, in our office, we have more appraisers than I think most appraisers do, because we essentially have a cost sharing arrangement where we have a young lady who deals with all of the new orders for all the appraisers in her office. And we use a program called A-Now that helps to organize so that they can look and see how many orders we have, how long is it going to take us to get this thing done, and how far out are we. And so when these orders come in, I'll bet probably 60 to 70% of the assignments that come in the door, we come back with a counter proposal. And oftentimes the counter proposal is that I can't do it for that fee, but I can do it for this one. And I can't get it done by this time, but I can get it done for that time. And probably 50% of the time we don't get the assignment, which is okay. Because from my perspective, I would rather not be late. I want to get the work done when I say I'm going to do it. And I've gotten better at that. I have, there's been times when I'm a little more optimistic than practical, and have found that it's been difficult to get things done when I think I'm going to be able to do it. But as we've evolved over time, we've gotten a lot better at getting these things completed on or before the due date, and we give them a fee that we will stick with, and oftentimes it's higher than what they're asking for. But we find that it works okay for us. We've got other direct engagement lenders that work very, very well for us. But if you manage the if you manage the management company, and if you provide work that's on time, what happens is over the process of time, they will give you more work simply because they don't have to be spending a lot of their resources finding out if you're going to be on time and what the status of the assignment is.
So what you're saying then is, by being selective, and then with those AMCs with which you're selective, by being timely, they're willing to pay a premium for timely, top-notch service, correct?
Many do. The appraisal management companies you want to work for do. And there's a lot of these appraisal management companies that have a tier system where the appraisers who provide the best service and have the fewest revisions and those kinds of things, they will give them more work and pay them a little more money, because from their business model, it's ultimately cheaper to pay the appraiser a little more and get it done on time and not have as much follow-up. And so ultimately it becomes a matter of, we are a service provider. And as much as oftentimes we don't like that idea, we just want to be that independent guy where I want to hang out in my office and I don't want to get a single phone call. I just want to get my assignments and get them done, which is the way I am, which is why I hire people to handle all the emails and take the phone calls and deal with all the stuff I don't like to do. And that makes us a little more efficient.
Let's talk about closing statements for a moment. Now, appraisers have for a long time asked for closing statements to break out the gross fee. In other words, the client, or excuse me, the borrower is charged, say, $1,000 for an appraisal, but yet some of that goes to the AMC, some of that goes to the appraiser. So far, the appraisal industry has not been, how shall we say, successful in getting that to take place. Do you see that changing? In other words, do you see a situation where in the future the appraisal fee will be broken out so the borrower, the person who actually has to write the checks, is going to understand how much of that appraisal fee went to the AMC and how much of it went to the appraiser?
There's still efforts underway to do some of that, as every time they go in and look at the disclosure forms, the appraisers, including through efforts with NAA, through the National Association of Appraisers, as well as through National Association of Realtors on our end, we pushed for that to happen. It hasn't happened. It's unfortunate, I think, because a lender who has an appraisal desk, it costs money to run that appraisal desk and to provide a direct engagement system within that lending institution or mortgage company. And so they have a higher overhead that they have to charge their borrower in some other way. Whereas with this, it just looks like people are paying, you know, $7 or $8 or $1,000 for the appraisal when the appraiser is getting paid a percentage of that, or some amount that's less than that. And then oftentimes I've been in homes many times where they will say, wow, wished I could make $700 for doing this appraisal. And you're going, well, so do I. That's not what I'm getting paid. And so we think that there is benefit in having informed consumers. In fact, one of the things that we did in our statutes as we were developing the AMC laws and rules was that the appraisers were to break out the fee that was paid to the appraiser and the amount that was kept by the appraisal management company. In reality, I mean, the idea was let's inform the borrower on what they're getting paid for. There's been a lot of debates over how effective that's been, and I think in reality it probably hasn't been that effective. But the thing that when we were developing, this is just to swerve off from that topic just a little bit, but we were worried that if we made it mandatory that the appraiser report that, and he didn't, that we didn't want to have appraisers getting sanctioned, because they didn't disclose the breakout. And we did make it mandatory for an AMC to provide that information to the appraiser. The reality, I think, is that most people, including myself, just want to get the thing done. And I will disclose what I was paid for the appraisal and all of my in all the appraisals I do. But sometimes the lenders just don't provide you with what the total fee is being charged to the borrower. And I guess technically, if you wanted to, in Utah at least, if I wanted to file a complaint, I could probably do that. But we generally are just trying to get this thing done and try to provide what information we can.
Let's consider a brand new appraiser. Now, by brand new, I don't mean a trainee, someone recently licensed, but someone who is just opening their own shop. Would you recommend that appraiser work with AMCs, or would you recommend that appraiser try to avoid working with AMCs and instead do private work? In other words, attorneys, tax appeal work, eminent domain work, divorce work, etc.
Tim, it's a business decision that everybody has to face and decide. There is work to be had through appraisal management companies, and the level of satisfaction that the appraiser has is going to vary based on temperament and some of these kinds of things. But I know for me, the thing that we have done, and our appraisal office is a full service appraisal office. We do everything, including, in fact, I've got a contract with the Department of Transportation to do some condemnation on roadways. We do commercial, I've done water rights, we've done residential houses, and everything in between. And people say, you're out of your mind to do that. Why don't you find something that you can specialize in and just do that? And when I started in the business, it was a small area. If you didn't do everything, you weren't very busy. And the thing that I discovered is that the reality is the market cycle. And what we oftentimes found is that a good residential appraiser was making more money than the commercial guys were, but the workflow kind of ebbed and flowed. And by having several appraisers working together, we found that we were able to balance the workflow, and it kept us very busy. And even when the markets were bad, interest rates were high, there was always something else that we could do, including estate work and pre-listing assignments and stuff like that. And so I personally think that it's a good idea for appraisers to not create such a narrow market niche so that when interest rates go up, and they will, that I'm out of business, because I've so targeted my appraisal career on a specific mortgage lending kind of a deal that if that business goes away, and it may just go away through technology, it's nice to have at least a body of work that you can turn to if when things change. And so I wouldn't rule out working with an AMC, but I think at some point you have to look and determine what kind of work can I do that is most cost effective. And the caution I would give any appraiser who's doing stuff that they're not accustomed to doing is get competent in it. Go take a class. Make sure that you're not using the wrong forms to do the certain kinds of assignments that end up getting you in trouble.
Let's talk about the fact that it's fairly common to read that appraisers will receive an email from an AMC in which the AMC offers what the appraiser considers to be a ridiculously low fee. And the appraiser writes back a snotty email inviting the AMC to do unspeakable things to themselves and the horses the AMC rode in on. Now, would you advise that kind of business practice, or is there something a little bit more diplomatic the appraiser could do?
Well, I'd be lying if I didn't think those thoughts when that happens. But it's been interesting because we've had some of these assignments that where it comes in way below what we would be willing to accept. And what we do is say, we can't do it for that, but this is what we can do it for. And it is surprising to me how many times we get the assignment. And so the thing that one of the things that we sometimes find is that if you had a top 5 list of things that appraisers hate about dealing with AMCs, it's revision request, it's the constant follow-up of you looked at the property yet, and all of these kinds of things. And frankly, there's some technologies out there that can really help you manage that a little more effectively, that take a lot of that aggravation away. And then the probably one of my least favorites is there's a few AMCs out there that have the most difficult, obnoxious upload. There's one out there that it was taking us an average of an hour to upload the file once it's done to the AMC's platform. And so, we basically, whenever one of those assignments came through, we charged an extra $100 to do the assignment because we knew we had an extra hour to go. They would only give us assignments out in rural places. They were always hard. And so we were charging more anyway. And then we charged just a technology trouble fee on top of that. And because it was in a rural area where there weren't very many appraisers, or there were no appraisers, and they were all having to drive 100 miles or more, they'd still give us the assignments. And we would reluctantly take them. But I think you ultimately have to decide what kind of an appraiser do you want to be, what kind of work do you want to do. But you certainly can bid these things, and if you bid them fairly, and if you do what you say you're going to do to your client, it's best practices as a businessman.
Okay, we've talked about the pros and the cons. Let's look at a con for a minute. How does an appraiser effectively fire an AMC?
Well, it's pretty easy. We've had a couple where we say, we just don't want to be on your list. Take us off the list. And you oftentimes, because of some of the regulatory requirements that have been put into place, they need a letter from you saying, hey, put it in writing, because I don't want to get into trouble with your regulatory agency for not giving you assignments and then having somebody come in and complain about it. We want a paper trail. But it's pretty easy to just say, please remove me from your panel. I no longer want to be receiving assignments from you. And that's about all it takes.
How effective is it for an appraiser to file a complaint with the state appraisal board against an AMC?
I've seen, and I'm still involved with some of the regulatory oversight in the state of Utah, and it depends on how good the complaint is presented to the state. If you have a legitimate complaint for non-payment, for other things, it's pretty effective. The thing that I think that appraisers have to be aware of, and I've seen this over and over and over again, where appraisers think their work is perfect. And from experience, I can tell you most of the time it's not. And so if I go file a complaint on an AMC and it turns out that I'm producing below substandard work, maybe I've got a problem, because they might start looking in. If the AMC is saying, listen, I've got a problem with this appraiser, there's errors in the appraisal, I've asked for those changes to be made, the appraiser is refusing to make those changes, and so this is the nature of the conflict, I might have a problem. And so I think that one of the things that all of us ought to be doing all the time is going in and having a critical review of our policies, our processes, and procedures in the way we do appraisals, to make sure that the appraisals we do are as good as they can be. And they're, for the most part, they're above reproach. I'm dealing with the issues with the highest and best use, and I know USPAP, and my reports comply. It is just shocking to me, Tim, and you're a USPAP instructor and you've seen this, how many people will claim they can't do something because USPAP says I can't do it, and they don't know what they're talking about. And so I think realistically, if I'm filing a complaint and I've got a legitimate basis for that complaint, file it. That's what the process is for. But it's always a good idea for us to be trying to do a good job with the work that we do. And sometimes having a critical review by somebody like yourself to go in and review it and say, you might want to look at making some changes here, so that you don't have a problem if someone gets a hold of this and they start looking into it carefully.
Craig, as we get close to the end, let's talk about something you mentioned just a few moments ago, a request for a revision. Now, Dodd-Frank specifically says that lenders, AMCs, etc., cannot put pressure on appraisers to change their value. Pressure meaning, hey, play ball here and otherwise you won't get paid. Or you come up with the value that we want on this one and we'll give you the next 10 on with premium fees, etc. Now, there's a fine line between a request for a valuation revision and pressure on the appraiser to change a value. Do you have any advice to appraisers on where that fine line exists and how to resist the pressure to change what you honestly and firmly believe to be a valid and reliable value opinion?
There's a couple of things that I would advise appraisers to do. Number one is that if your client comes back and says, we found a mistake, fix it. That is maybe one of the things that oftentimes is an advantage for an AMC, is that if they are doing an internal review and they find errors and they fix them, or you get them fixed before they get sent into the secondary market, that might actually be a protection for you. So if somebody, and we all make mistakes, and so if somebody finds something that's a legitimate mistake, fix it as quickly as you can, and be happy somebody got it before a state investigator or before it gets flagged someplace else. The one of the challenges that we've found as the GSEs, as Fannie and Freddie have kind of created their collateral underwriters and some of these other tools, we find that there's a lot of times where there's conflicts in data. And so we'll do an appraisal, we'll send it in, and they'll say, well, your peers said that it was average quality, you're saying it's good. Those are aggravating, and I don't like them. But usually the solution to the problem is just go in and say, this is why I said it's average quality. I think appraisers maybe could do a better job of establishing a standard for developing these opinions, but explain why, and usually that's the end of it. Oftentimes they'll come in and say, why did you not use these comparable sales? Well, frankly, that is not an effort to influence the appraiser or the results. It's simply the collateral underwriter has flagged these in their model as being comparable. They want to know why they weren't considered or used. And if they were considered, that's all you have to say. I considered those sales, but, and what we find in our area is oftentimes collateral underwriter doesn't do a very good job of differentiating between design and unit types. For example, it will look at primary above grade living space, but if you've got a property that's got a walkout basement, or if you've got one that's a 2-story versus a single story, it will flag sales that have taken place in the neighborhood, but they're completely different in design, or it oftentimes isn't accounting for below grade space or some of these other things. And so that's all you really have to do is say, hey, I was aware of this sale. I didn't use it because, and you explain it. Usually those are fine. They're really, your lender is just trying to clear this thing so they can get it sold in the secondary market. And while it's aggravating and I don't really like doing it, it's just part of what we sign up for. And the reality is that if you have a client where that routinely happens, charge more money. It's okay. And if they won't pay more money, let some poor other dummy get the assignment, and you can go get the work that pays you better, that doesn't have the doesn't have all of the problems. And the final thing is to make sure, and this is where you start getting into trouble, is with revision requests that include a reconsideration of value. Now I had a realtor friend of mine give me a call, and they had an appraisal done. This home was selling, and all of the comparable sales that the appraiser used, they were in the same subdivision, they were a model match, and the sales that were used were selling. So this was like a week ago. All of the sales were back in November, or excuse me, September to July of 2019. And the market has changed, but the appraiser refused to make any kind of adjustment for market condition. And the explanation, and I don't know if the realtor was getting the explanation completely right, but it seemed to be, accurate, was that, well, I couldn't bracket. I didn't have a current sale to bracket to make an age adjustment. So they had only used 4 comparable sales in a 1004 MC. So there was no trend data that you could rely on. And they refused to use homes that were bigger or much bigger. And so the reality is they refused to make an adjustment for it. Ironically, that sale fell out and they resold the property for the same price a day later. So the question is who was right? Was the agent right in pricing this property, or was the appraiser right, who's using dated sales and refused to consider that the market had changed over a 9-month period of time? And I think sometimes we have to be careful that in holding my ground, I ought to be on firm ground. I want to be on a good solid foundation. And if I'm on a sandy foundation, I might find myself in trouble. And so I think the reality is that I get all kinds of revision requests where the data is just awful. And I think every appraiser does. And in that case, you look at it and say, yeah, I reviewed this data. I didn't include it, and you go through and explain why. But there have been times where I've gone in and changed the appraisal results because the data they provided was compelling and it made sense. And I don't know that I want to hang myself up because I had originally come up with a conclusion that may not be as sound as it could be when additional data is provided. And so I think we have to be cautious on when we change I hate changing the value on an appraisal, but it does happen from time to time, and it's usually based on quality data. And if you do that, and I explain carefully in my appraisal why I made the change, And in making revisions, probably the most important thing that you can do is put a log of the changes that you've made to the appraisal somewhere in the report, and make sure that the last date that you changed that appraisal is the report date. I have seen appraisers get hung up where they've gone in and changed the report several times. And now I've got 3 appraisals with the exact same dates, with different data, different results. And the state investigators looking at this and going, well, which one is the right one? Well, this one is. Well, they're all the same date. They're all the same inspection date, report date. I've got different data. Have I produced misleading appraisals? Well, you know, it's a tough situation to find yourself in. So if you're making revisions, make sure you explain to your client what you did, why you did it, and when you did it, and which one is the fine. You know, I've had several where there's 2 or 3 changes where somebody wants you to add a borrower, somebody wants you to add a spell out west, somebody wants you to do all kinds of stupid things that maybe we shouldn't have to worry about. But I will go in and outline, and if they've asked me to address certain kinds of things, I'll put the comments. This is what they asked me to address, and this is the answers. And that way, I want to make it clear so my clients don't can figure out what I did and why I did it.
Craig, you talked about standing your ground, and you were talking about standing on firm ground. Let's talk about that for a moment. Appraisers, by their nature, tend to be loners. We are charged with forming a value opinion, and it must be ours. And as a result, the research that we do tends to be the research that we do. We tend not to farm it out. Let's talk about, how does an appraiser, who by nature and very possibly by professional standard must act alone, how does that appraiser get to the point where he and she can run ideas past peers, run ideas past those with greater experience, etc., if indeed those are even important?
You know, Tim, I think probably one of the most important things we can do is, as appraisers, because of our independent nature, we tend to be loners maybe, and we don't interact with each other the way that perhaps we should. I know that we have all, one of the advantages in being in an appraisal office with other appraisers is the ability to walk next door and say, hey, what do you think? But we have a network of appraisers in our community where I get calls all the time from people saying, hey, I've run into this, what do you think? And I'm happy to visit and say, well, I don't know, maybe you ought to think about it this way. And but ultimately, as you pointed out, at the end of the day, you're the one signing the appraisal, representing this is your opinion of value. And you can talk to your peers and they may have different ideas, but ultimately you're the one signing on the dotted line, and you need to be the one that makes sure that that it's your opinion and you're not being influenced improperly. Now, I think one of the problems we sometimes think is that we should not have any influence, and I guess it depends on how you define that. But I'm developing my own opinion, but I've got data influences me all the time. In fact, every opinion I develop is based on the influence of the market data that I've been able to extract. And it may not be, you know, I may not like the house. I may think it's ugly. But if the data tells me there's a market for it and that they're paying a certain price, then that's what is going to happen. And I may hate it. My brother, when he graduated from high school, he hadn't been out working too long, and he got a job at a used car dealership. And his sales manager said, Jed, I want to teach you something that you need to remember. There's a butt for every seat. And we oftentimes find that with housing, is that we may have personal opinions about what we like and don't like, but it doesn't mean that there's not somebody else who likes it. And we need to be objective when we're doing these things.
From a standpoint of getting the input of peers, getting the benefit of someone else's take on things, someone else's point of view. What would you recommend an appraiser do?
One of the very best ways to do that is watch Tim Andersen. And
We can edit that part out.
no, it's really true. You need to be engaged. You need to kind of associate with people that have some perspectives beyond our own, and associate with the professional organization, the National Association of Appraisers. Our fees are like about $100 a year. Gee, it's the cheapest professional organization. We have newsletters that go out. We have magazines that go out. All of these things are intended. The only purpose is to help provide appraisers with the information that helps improve their skills. And we have people out there trying to influence policy that represents appraisers' interests most effectively. And so getting involved with an appraisal organization, your state appraisal organizations are probably one of the most effective ways to do that. We would love to see more state associations get involved with NAA, but whether they are or they're not, doesn't matter. Get out there, get involved, and go to meetings and visit with people and talk about some of these issues so that you can get some perspectives that may be beyond your own, and you may be able to adopt some of those things that'll help you.
Greg, if someone needed to consult with you, how could they get in touch with you?
Just send my email's pretty easy. It's Value Pro. I wanted value spelled right, but somebody else had already taken it. So it's valupro@gmail.com. Send me a note, and I'm happy to visit with people if you've got questions. We do even a few little YouTube training videos and things, and we're doing more all the time that talk a little bit about some different ideas on how you might be able to deal with some of the day-to-day issues with supporting adjustments and writing reports and things like that.
Craig, thank you. I appreciate it. As always, your candor and your enthusiasm are refreshing. Thank you very much. This is Tim Andersen, the Appraiser's Advocate. If I can ever be of help to you, please get in touch with me, tim@theappraisersadvocate.com. It'll be a pleasure to hear from you. If you like what you see here today, please subscribe and give us a like. If you don't like what we have done today, then write your complaint on the back of a $100 bill and send it into Craig's office, and I'm sure he'll respond timely.
We will gladly accept it.
And that's a joke, folks. That's a joke. Again, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate it. Until next time, thank you. Bye now.